The chandeliers sparkled like frozen constellations in the ceiling of the five-star hotel ballroom, scattering shards of light across champagne flutes and silver cutlery. Music drifted from the live string quartet, a tender melody that seemed to promise romance for everyone present. But for one guest, romance had long ago slipped through her fingers. Dr. Isabella Carter sat alone at a round table near the far corner of the hall. At 28, she was already known among colleagues for her relentless work as a medical resident, the kind of young physician who stayed past her shift to sit with patients no one else had time for. Yet tonight, her lab coat and stethoscope were replaced by a pale lavender dress. She had borrowed from a friend the hem brushing her ankles. The neckline modest yet flattering. She felt like an intruder in a world gilded with wealth. At the center of the room stood the bride and groom faces, glowing as cameras flashed. The groom lifted his new wife's hand and kissed it tenderly, drawing coos of delight from guests. Isabella's heart tightened. That man had once kissed her hand with the same devotion, whispered promises of forever in the on-call room of a hospital, convinced her that love could survive the pressure of endless shifts and sleepless nights. She had believed him. But in the end, his ambition had been stronger than his vows. He had traded her for someone with a family fortune. And now she was sitting at his wedding, uninvited by him, but drawn there by loyalty to a mutual friend who had begged her to attend. From the table beside her came a whisper, sharp as a scalpel. She came alone, at her ex's wedding. How pathetic. The words were not loud, but carried clearly enough to sting. Isabella's cheeks heated. She raised her glass of water and took a deliberate sip, pretending not to hear yet every syllable carved deeper into her. The song shifted a lilting waltz, urging couples to the dance floor. The sight of swirling gowns and polished shoes made Isabella feel even more solitary. She folded her hands in her lap nails, pressing into her palms, and told herself to hold on until it was polite to leave. But when she dared a glance toward the newlyweds, she caught the groom's eyes. For a fleeting instant, their gazes locked. His smile faltered before he turned back to his bride. That tiny hesitation cut her worse than open mockery. Her stomach knotted. She should stand, slip out quietly, retreat to the comfort of her small apartment and the pile of medical texts waiting on her desk. But her legs felt anchored. If she left too soon, it would look like defeat. So she remained trapped by her own pride and the watchful eyes of the wealthy guests. Then the air shifted. A shadow fell across her table as someone drew out the empty chair beside her. Without asking permission, he sat down, moving with a decisiveness that suggested the seat had always been his. Isabella looked up and blinked. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of presence that commanded attention, even in a crowd glittering with power. His suit was perfectly tailored black wool with a sheen that caught the light. A silver tie gleamed at his collar, and his face was sharply cut, all angles and precision. But it was his eyes that unsettled her. Gray as storm clouds, cool and assessing, they fixed on her with unnerving intensity. She opened her mouth to protest, but before she could speak, he leaned slightly closer, just enough for his words to reach her without anyone else hearing. "Pretend you are with me." Her heart stuttered. She turned her head toward him, startled. "Excuse me, do not look at me." His gaze stayed trained across the room, where a small cluster of guests was watching them openly, whispering behind raised hands. "They are gossiping. If you do not mind, let us act as though we came together. It spares you their stares and spares me their matchmaking." Isabella blinked, caught between indignation and disbelief. He was a stranger, an intruder in her already fragile evening. And yet his voice held a calm authority that made her pulse jump. She wanted to scoff, to tell him she was not the kind of woman to play games. But when she glanced sideways, she noticed the change. The women who had, just moments ago, eyed her with derision now looked with curiosity. The atmosphere had shifted. She was no longer pitiable. She was attached. Her lips parted in a small, incredulous laugh. "So you think I will simply play the girlfriend of a man I do not know?" Finally, he turned his head toward her. The gray eyes were cold, but there was the faintest glint beneath the surface, like steel catching light. His cologne carried a subtle note of sandalwood, clean and refined. "Trust me," he murmured. "We both win." Isabella hesitated, her fingers tightening around the stem of her glass. Common sense urged her to stand and leave him sitting there to reclaim control of her evening. But her pride, battered from the whispers, whispered otherwise. Already the sting of mockery had dulled. Already she felt a strange shield of protection radiating from this enigmatic man. Her lips curved in a half-smile tinged with defiance. "And how far do you plan to take this little performance?" He allowed one brow to rise, the corner of his mouth tilting. "Leave that to me." Then he shifted casually, resting his arm along the back of her chair. The gesture was so naturally intimate that several heads turned. Laughter tinkled behind hands. Isabella sat straighter, alarm bells ringing in her mind. This man was far too skilled at playing pretend. "What is your name?" she asked quietly. Suspicion woven into her voice. "Alexander Knight." His answer was clipped, as though explanations were unnecessary. Isabella froze. The name was familiar even to a resident with little time for headlines. Knight was the billionaire founder of Knight Biotech, the youngest CEO in medical technology, praised for his innovations yet whispered about for his ruthless ambition. She had seen his face once in a magazine, but never expected him to sit beside her at a wedding reception, let alone speak to her as if they were allies. Before she could gather her wits, he reached for the bottle of wine, chilling in silver beside them, and poured gracefully into her glass. To appearances, he was every inch the attentive partner. "Relax, Dr. Carter," he said softly, pronouncing her name with surprising ease. "I have a good memory for remarkable faces." Her pulse leapt. He knew her name. How? Their eyes locked, and Isabella had to look away, cheeks burning. She reminded herself to breathe. This was absurd, dangerous, reckless. But as the music swelled and the guests turned their attentions toward the dance floor, she realized something undeniable. The night had just shifted course. What had begun as humiliation at the wedding of her former lover had transformed into something entirely different. The stranger beside her was no ordinary man. And the moment he whispered, "Pretend you are with me," a story neither of them expected had already begun. Isabella's pulse had barely steadied from the shock of his whisper when the man beside her straightened, sliding seamlessly into a role that felt rehearsed yet unnervingly convincing. Alexander Knight did not hesitate. He placed a steady hand over hers on the table, his expression calm and commanding, and when a nearby guest turned with a curious smile, Alex leaned closer and said clearly enough for others to overhear, "I hope the steak here is better than last time." The line was meaningless, but it created an impression familiarity, intimacy, the casual banter of a couple long accustomed to sharing evenings together. Isabella's lips parted in disbelief. She had not agreed to anything beyond that absurd whisper, yet suddenly she was part of a performance being staged before half the city's elite. And the audience believed it. She could feel the shift ripple through the tables around them. The stares that had cut into her minutes earlier, branding her the abandoned ex, softened into intrigue. Who was she to be sitting with Alexander Knight, the elusive billionaire who rarely appeared in public with anyone at his side? When she stole a glance toward the dance floor, her breath caught. The groom her ex had seen them. For the first time that evening, his composure faltered. His hand on his bride's waist stiffened. His smile strained, his eyes flicked back to Isabella and Alex. For Isabella, it was like a sudden rush of oxygen. The humiliation that had weighed on her chest eased, replaced by a sharp flicker of vindication. She was not the pitiful woman left behind. She was someone worth a second look. Yet inside turmoil churned. She turned to Alex and hissed under her breath, "What exactly are you doing?" He kept his gaze forward, lips barely moving. "Saving you and saving myself. You need cover, I need a companion." Simple exchange. Isabella shook her head incredulous. "This is insane." His arm shifted along the back of her chair, a subtle gesture that drew even more attention. "Smile," he murmured. "They are watching." Her pride wrestled with reason. Logic told her to pull away, to declare him a stranger and storm out. But the memory of whispers, the gleam of pity in her ex's eyes burned too strongly. If this man wanted a performance, she could play along. She curved her lips into a polite smile enough to convince those watching. A woman across the table leaned over with a glint of amusement in her eyes. "You two make a striking pair." Isabella almost choked, but Alex responded smoothly. "She is remarkable, is she not?" Isabella nearly dropped her glass. He was frighteningly adept at this. For the next hour, she lived in a surreal haze. Each time someone approached, Alex introduced her with calm confidence, his hand lightly brushing hers, his tone claiming connection, without ever stepping beyond the line of plausibility. Isabella found herself nodding, smiling, even responding as though they had shared years instead of minutes, and the crowd believed. When dessert was served, Alex leaned close and asked softly, "Do you regret playing along?" Isabella stared into her glass, her voice a whisper. "I regret coming here at all. But for the first time tonight, I am not the only one regretting." Her eyes flicked to the groom, who now glanced toward them with poorly disguised irritation. Alex allowed himself the faintest smile. "Then perhaps you do not regret entirely." Isabella wanted to retort, to remind him she had not asked for his interference. But the truth was harder to admit. His presence had shifted. The night pulled her from the pit of humiliation into a place where she could breathe. Still, she asked quietly, "Why me? Why sit beside me when you could have chosen anyone here?" Alex's gaze remained steady. "Because you looked like you would rather vanish than be seen, and I could use someone who is not eager for the spotlight." It was a curious answer, one that left Isabella unsettled. She studied him, trying to decipher whether there was sincerity beneath the mask, but his face remained unreadable. As the night wound down and couples began to drift toward the exits, Isabella gathered her courage. "This charade ends when I walk out of here," she told him firmly. Alex inclined his head slightly as though conceding. "Of course, the performance is only for tonight. Relief washed through her, though it was laced with something else, something she refused to name. They stood together as guests passed by with farewells. Several smiled warmly, whispering congratulations as if they truly were a couple. Isabella managed a polite nod, but inside her mind reeled. The deception was too clean, too easy. Alex offered his arm as they left the hall. She hesitated before slipping her hand through the weight of eyes still pressing from behind. Outside the hotel, the night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain. Isabella withdrew her arm quickly. "Thank you, but I do not owe you anything." He looked down at her eyes, unreadable in the dim light. "No, you do not, but you played the role well." With that, he stepped into a waiting car, leaving her standing on the marble steps with her heart racing and her mind spinning. Isabella inhaled deeply, trying to steady herself. It had been madness, a reckless masquerade. And yet, as the car pulled away, she caught herself whispering, "Who are you really?" Alexander Knight. Isabella told herself that the performance was over, that when she walked out of that ballroom, she would never see Alexander Knight again. She returned to her small apartment, pulled off the lavender dress, and tried to immerse herself in medical charts and case studies. Yet the memory of his voice lingered, the calm authority in his whisper, the storm-colored eyes that seemed to look right through her. She reminded herself that he was dangerous territory, a billionaire with motives she could not understand, while she was a resident, struggling through 80-hour weeks. Their paths should never have crossed, but life had other plans. 3 days later, as Isabella stepped out of the hospital after a grueling double shift, the familiar glint of a sleek black car caught her eye. The rear window rolled down, and Alexander Knight himself sat inside, immaculate as ever, though the faint shadows under his eyes suggested he was as sleepless as she was. Isabella froze, pulse quickening. "Do not tell me you are here to buy a stethoscope," she muttered. Alex's lips curved faintly, not quite a smile. "Get in, Dr. Carter. I only need 5 minutes of your time." Isabella's first instinct was to refuse. She was exhausted, her scrubs wrinkled, her hair pulled into a messy knot. This was not the glamorous woman who had played his companion at the wedding. She was simply herself, weary and raw. But curiosity tugged at her, along with something deeper she did not want to name. With a sigh, she opened the door and slid inside. The interior smelled faintly of leather and cedar, a cocoon, far removed from the sterile scent of antiseptic she had lived in all day. Alex wasted no time. "Do you remember what I said at the wedding?" he asked. Isabella rolled her eyes. "Hard to forget. I nearly choked on dessert from all that fake smiling." The corner of his mouth twitched, amusement flickering briefly. "Here is the thing. The press and my board are relentless. They want to see me with someone. They want stability, family, image. My company is thriving, but in their eyes I am incomplete." Isabella frowned. "And you think dragging me into your spotlight will fix that?" He met her gaze directly, voice steady. "I need someone who can hold her own, someone who will not crumble under scrutiny. At the wedding you played the role effortlessly." Isabella laughed, sharp and incredulous. "Effortlessly." My palms were sweating the entire time. He did not flinch. "You still convinced everyone. That is what matters." Isabella shook her head. "I am a doctor, not your prop. My life is too full of chaos already." Alex leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly. "I can make it worth your while. Funding for your hospital wing, resources for research, You told me you treat patients who cannot afford care. Imagine what you could do with a grant from Knight Biotech. The words hit her like a blow. She thought of the oncology ward where children fought battles. Too unfair where parents wept because insurance refused another round of treatment. She thought of the free clinic that struggled to stay open with outdated equipment. She thought of her patients' faces etched with hope and fear. Her chest tightened. He was manipulating her, offering what she longed for most, the chance to heal more lives. But was it manipulation if the outcome saved people? She pressed her fingers to her temple. "Why me?" she whispered. "You could hire an actress, someone trained to play the part." Alex shook his head. "Actresses want the cameras. I want authenticity. You are grounded, focused. You have no interest in fame. That is why you will work." Isabella exhaled shakily. The car hummed through city streets, neon lights streaking across the windows. She wanted to say no, to walk away from the mess before it swallowed her. But the memory of those whispered taunts at the wedding resurfaced. The image of her ex's smug smile burned behind her eyes. And now the offer dangled before her, tied not to pride, but to the lives of patients she could not forget. At last she looked at Alex, her voice quiet but firm. "If I agree, there are conditions." His brow arched. "Name them." "First, I am not a puppet. I choose when to walk away. If you become unbearable, I am gone. Second, there will be no lies beyond the performance. No false promises, no pretending beyond what is necessary." Alex regarded her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Fair." Then he extended his hand. "Temporary agreement." Isabella hesitated, then slipped her hand into his. His grip was firm, warm, steady. For an instant, the world outside the car vanished, and she felt the peculiar certainty that she was stepping into something far larger than herself. "Just pretend, Parker," he murmured, using her first name with deliberate intimacy. Isabella's breath caught. "Pretend," she echoed. But inside a voice whispered that once she crossed this line, nothing would ever be pretend again. The first test of their arrangement came sooner than Isabella expected. Barely a week after the awkward handshake that sealed their deal, she found herself standing outside the grand entrance of a downtown hotel, the venue glittering with light and opulence. Tonight was not a wedding, but a charity gala, hosted by Knight Biotech to raise funds for the development of new drugs. Isabella adjusted the hem of the rented evening gown that clung to her nervously. The fabric shimmered under the golden lights, though she felt like a fraud wrapped in borrowed silk. Her feet wobbled slightly in unfamiliar heels. She took a breath, but the air caught in her throat as she nearly stumbled on the last marble step. Before gravity betrayed her completely, a hand gripped her firmly at the waist. Steady, Alex's voice murmured calm and unyielding. Isabella glanced up, her pulse skipping at the sight of him. He looked like he had walked straight out of a glossy magazine. His black suit tailored flawlessly, his silver tie glinting under the lights, his expression composed yet watchful. For a moment she forgot to breathe. "You really enjoy saving damsels in distress, don't you?" she muttered, cheeks heating. His lips curved faintly. "Only when they insist on wearing treacherous shoes." He offered his arm, and she hesitated before sliding her hand into the crook, aware of the stares already gathering. As they entered the ballroom, heads turned instantly. Conversations faltered, champagne flutes paused mid-air, and whispers rippled across the crowd. Night finally brought someone. "Who is she?" Isabella's stomach knotted, but Alex walked as though impervious, his steps steady, his presence commanding. He introduced her with calm certainty, never embellishing, never faltering, simply letting her stand at his side. And the effect was electric. Women eyed her with thinly veiled envy. Men studied her with new curiosity, and even the board members, who had once pressed Alex about his solitary life, now looked with tentative approval. Isabella forced herself to breathe. This was pretend, nothing more. When the music swelled, Alex turned to her. "Dance with me." Isabella's eyes widened. "I will trip and humiliate both of us." His voice softened, pitched low for her ears alone. "Just follow, like surgery, steady hands." His words drew a reluctant laugh from her nerves, loosening just enough. She placed her hand in his and allowed him to guide her to the dance floor. The moment his hand settled at her waist, warmth seeped through the layers of fabric. He moved with precision, leading with subtle cues that carried her effortlessly through the waltz. At first she stumbled her steps, clumsy, but his grip steadied her, his gaze anchoring her. Gradually her body found rhythm with his. Their eyes met briefly, and something flickered there, unspoken and sharp. Around them the ballroom blurred. It felt absurdly natural, as if they had danced together 100 times. Isabella's heart thudded too fast, betraying her. She reminded herself sternly that this was an arrangement, a charade, but every brush of his hand sent shivers through her resolve. When the song ended, applause echoed around them. Isabella pulled back, slightly breathless cheeks flushed. "You are frighteningly good at this," she whispered. Alex leaned closer, his gray eyes unreadable. "Who said I am pretending?" Her pulse faltered at the implication. But before she could respond, a woman in a glittering gown swept over, offering Alex an arch smile. "Alexander, it has been too long." "And who is this?" Alex's expression did not shift. "This is Dr. Isabella Carter," his voice smooth as glass. "She is important to me." Isabella nearly choked on air but forced herself to smile politely as the woman's eyes flicked over her with thinly veiled calculation. When the woman finally drifted away, Isabella exhaled sharply. "Important to you? That is quite a line." He adjusted his cufflink casually. "The line worked. She will not bother you again." Isabella narrowed her eyes but said nothing. Throughout the evening, Alex remained at her side, introducing her to influential figures, guiding conversations with subtle skill. Each time she faltered, he smoothed over the moment with a quiet remark or a steadying look. And slowly, against her will, Isabella realized she was no longer acting merely for survival. She was slipping into the role, letting the warmth of his attention pull her into a dangerous comfort. Near the end of the night, as they stood at the edge of the ballroom with dessert plates in hand, Isabella leaned closer and muttered, "You really are an actor, Knight." He glanced at her lips curving faintly. "Or perhaps I am simply telling the truth." She swallowed hard, unable to reply. For a heartbeat too long, the world seemed to contract to the space between them, the unspoken charge in the air. Then a photographer passed by, raising his camera, and Alex slipped his arm around her waist, drawing her close with practiced ease. "Smile," he whispered. The flash went off, capturing them in a tableau of elegance and intimacy. Isabella forced a smile, her heart stumbling, her mind spinning. This was supposed to be pretend, yet each moment with him blurred the lines further. By the time the gala ended, Isabella's cheeks ached from smiling, and her pulse thrummed from more than champagne. As they exited into the cool night, she withdrew her hand from his arm, needing space to breathe. "That was exhausting," she muttered. Alex opened the car door for her, his expression unreadable. "Exhausting, perhaps, but effective. You played the part well." Isabella sank into the seat, staring out at the glittering city. She told herself she was still in control, still pretending. But deep inside, a quiet voice whispered that something had already shifted. And that terrified her more than anything. The arrangement that began as a performance soon unfolded into something neither of them could fully contain. Over the following weeks, Isabella found herself swept into a world she had only glimpsed in passing. A world of grand concerts, art galleries, and hushed cafes tucked into corners of the city where Alexander Knight seemed to lower his guard by increments. At first, she kept mental notes reminding herself this was temporary, a transaction dressed in silk. Yet slowly her defenses wavered. One evening, he invited her to a symphony performance at the historic downtown theater. The ceiling stretched high and painted with celestial murals, the chandeliers glowing like captured stars. Isabella sat stiffly in the velvet seat, her borrowed gown brushing the carpet, while Alex sat beside her in a dark suit, eyes fixed on the stage. When the first notes of Beethoven rose through the air, she stole a glance at him. His profile was sharp, his expression distant, yet she noticed his hand resting still on his knee. Fingers curled tightly as though holding something unseen. During the interlude, he spoke quietly, almost as if confessing. "My mother used to love this piece. She would play it on the piano in our house, said it made her feel alive." Isabella blinked, surprised by the softness in his voice. What happened to her? His gaze did not leave the stage. "She died when I was young. The doctors tried an experimental treatment. It failed. My father told me never to trust imperfection again." His words carried a weight heavier than the music itself. Isabella's throat tightened. For a moment she forgot the man beside her was a billionaire who had barged into her life with arrogance. For a moment he was just a son who had lost his mother, a boy molded by grief, and an unforgiving father. She whispered, "Sometimes imperfection is what makes us human." He turned his head, gray eyes meeting hers, and for an instant she felt as though the world shrank to that narrow space between them. Another night he took her to a small cafe far from luxury with wooden tables and the aroma of roasted beans. Isabella laughed at the sight of him cradling a plain cappuccino. His tailored suit, a sharp contrast to the humble surroundings. "Never thought I would see you here," she teased. Alex's lips curved faintly. "Do not tell anyone. I have a reputation to maintain." The banter drew laughter from her, warm and unguarded, and in that laughter she caught the glimmer of something dangerous, something real. But the bond deepened not only through his confessions, it also grew through her own. One late night at the hospital, Isabella sat beside a patient, a boy of 12 with leukemia, whose frail body trembled with fever. She stayed long past her shift, holding his hand until he drifted into restless sleep. When she finally stepped outside into the cold night air, she found Alex waiting by his car. "You look exhausted," he said softly. She shrugged, tears pricking her eyes. "I lost a patient last month, 17 years old. I keep thinking maybe if I had stayed longer, pushed harder." Her voice cracked. Alex placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You cannot save everyone. Even I had to learn that." His words were steady, but she sensed the echo of his own scars. She looked up at him, and in the stillness of the hospital parking lot, something shifted between them. It was no longer only a performance for the eyes of others. It was solace unspoken and fragile. Yet as intimacy grew, so did shadows. One afternoon, while updating patient charts, Isabella stumbled across a file flagged for follow-up. The notes detailed participants in a clinical trial funded partly by Knight Biotech. Several patients had developed severe complications, yet the official summary listed outcomes as successful. Isabella frowned, scrolling deeper. The language was inconsistent, certain fields overwritten. It was as though someone had deliberately edited the data to erase negative results. A chill ran down her spine. She checked the digital signature attached to the final approval. Alexander Knight. Her breath caught. The man who had shared his mother's story at the symphony, the man who teased her in a cafe, was tied to a cover-up that endangered lives. She closed the file quickly, her pulse racing. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe someone had used his credentials without his knowledge. But what if it was true? She leaned against the wall of the empty records room, pressing a hand to her chest. The weight of duty pressed on one side, the pull of emotion on the other. She was a doctor sworn to protect her patients, to honor truth. Yet she was also a woman who had begun to fall for a man who claimed to need her. Her mind spun. When she saw Alex later that week at another gallery event, his hand resting lightly at her back, his voice low with amusement, as he commented on abstract paintings, Isabella could hardly hear him. All she could see were those flagged charts, the altered outcomes, the signature at the bottom. She forced a smile, laughter sounding hollow even to her own ears. He studied her for a moment, brows faintly furrowed, as though sensing a distance he could not name. "Are you all right?" She nodded quickly. "Just tired." His gaze lingered, but he did not press. Isabella turned away, hiding the turmoil in her eyes. In that moment, she knew with painful clarity that their bond was no longer pretend, and that made the truth she had discovered all the more dangerous. The nights that followed were restless ones for Isabella. She would lie in her small apartment, the hum of city traffic, filtering through thin walls, her laptop screen, glowing with the data she could not ignore. Each line of the clinical trial reports haunted her. Patients flagged with severe complications had been erased from the official narrative. The inconsistencies were deliberate, not clerical errors, and each falsified entry carried the digital signature of Alexander Knight. Every time she closed the file, she saw his face in memory, the steady eyes that had guided her across the dance floor, the rare smile in the cafe, the haunted look when he confessed about his mother's death. Could that same man knowingly endanger lives for profit or reputation? The thought clawed at her. She had taken an oath to protect patients, to tell the truth, even when it was inconvenient. Yet her heart wrenched at the idea of betraying him. One evening they attended a dinner hosted by international investors. The room was glittering with glassware and low conversations in accented English. Isabella wore a navy gown that clung to her shoulders, but beneath the satin her stomach churned. She sat beside Alex, smiled when cameras turned, and laughed at polite jokes. Yet the whole time she felt the weight of the hidden files pressing against her ribs. Between courses she leaned closer and whispered, "Do you ever keep secrets that could hurt lives?" Alex stilled his fork, pausing midair. His eyes shifted toward her, storm gray and unreadable. Always, he murmured, voice low, It is survival in my world. The words pierced her like needles. Survival. Did survival mean erasing patience, silencing truth? Isabella felt her throat tighten. She wanted to demand answers, to throw the files into his face and watch his expression. But the room brimmed with power brokers, their eyes sharp and their ears prying. This was not the place. Instead, she forced a brittle smile and clutched her wineglass until her knuckles whitened. Later that night, when the event ended and they rode in silence through the city, Alex studied her profile in the reflection of the tinted window. "You are distant," he said. Isabella turned away, unable to meet his gaze. "I am tired." He did not press, but the air between them grew heavy, strained with words unsaid. In the hospital the next day, she could not concentrate. Every chart she touched, every patient she checked, reminded her of the stakes. Lives depended on truth, and yet the man she was beginning to love stood at the center of deception. Her chest ached with the dual weight of duty and emotion. That evening, she returned to her apartment and opened the files once more. The faces of patients filled her mind, the 12-year-old boy, fighting leukemia, the teenager she had lost, the families who clung to hope with desperate hands. Could she turn away from them to protect her heart? She whispered into the darkness, torn and trembling. "If I stay silent, I am complicit. If I speak, I destroy him." Tears blurred her vision. She thought of Alex's hand, it steadying her, of his rare laughter, of the way he had made her feel seen at her lowest moment. She thought of the promise in his eyes when he whispered, "Trust me." Her heart pulled one way, her oath pulled the other. The following weekend, Alex invited her to a secluded estate outside the city, a place surrounded by pine trees and silence. He told her he needed to escape the endless scrutiny, to breathe away from flashing cameras. Isabella went hoping perhaps the quiet would bring clarity. They walked through the forest trails, their breaths visible in the crisp air. At one point, Alex stopped and asked softly, "Do you ever regret choosing medicine?" She shook her head. "Never, even when it breaks me." He studied her, something unreadable, flickering in his gaze. "You are different, Isabella. Most people in my world want power or recognition. You want neither. You want to save lives." His words should have warmed her, but they only made the pain sharper. Because if he truly saw her, if he truly understood, then how could he sign away lives with the stroke of a pen? That night, as they sat by the fire in the estate's living room, the flames casting golden light across his face, Isabella could not hold back any more. She whispered, "If you had to choose between protecting people and protecting yourself, which would you choose?" Alex's jaw tightened. In this world, if you do not protect yourself, you cannot protect anyone. His answer twisted inside her like a blade. She stared into the fire, her heart aching. She wanted to believe him, wanted to cling to the fragile intimacy they had built. But the files loomed in her mind, undeniable and damning. When he reached for her hand, she let him take it, but her thoughts were a storm. Her heart whispered love. Her duty screamed truth, and between the two she felt herself unraveling. The fragile balance Isabella had tried to maintain collapsed sooner than she expected. One evening she was summoned to Alex's penthouse under the pretense of discussing upcoming charity events. The elevator opened to sweeping glass walls overlooking the glittering skyline, the room filled with polished steel and understated luxury. She had rehearsed what she might say, how she might probe for the truth, without revealing the files she had seen. But the moment she stepped inside, she sensed something different in the air. Alex stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid, his eyes colder than she had ever seen them. "Sit down, Isabella," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. Confused, she lowered herself onto the edge of the leather sofa. "What is this about?" He turned a tablet in his hand, the screen glowing with lines of code and hospital access logs. "You have been in the restricted sections of the patient database." Her heart lurched. "How did you—" He cut her off sharply. "Do not insult me. I have security protocols for a reason. Every login is traced. You have been digging where you should not." Isabella's breath quickened. "I had to Alex. I saw irregularities. I saw patients hurt. Someone is falsifying records." His expression darkened. "And you think it is me? You think every smile, every word I spoke, was just a mask for some monstrous lie?" The accusation stung because it mirrored her own torment. Tears welled in her eyes. "At first, maybe I doubted. Maybe I thought you were involved. But then She stopped, her throat tightening. He stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. "But then what? You fell for me." Her lips trembled. "Yes. Against my better judgment, against everything I told myself, I fell for you." His jaw clenched, muscles rigid. Then all of it was a lie. Every laugh, every dance, every moment, was it just you gathering evidence? No. Her protest was desperate. It started as pretense, yes, but it became real. "You became real to me." Alex shook his head, his eyes blazing. "You used me." The same words that had once shielded her from humiliation now cut her open. He turned away, staring out at the city, as though the lights could anchor him. "It is over, Isabella. Whatever we had, whatever this was, ends here." Her chest cracked. She rose unsteadily, her voice breaking. "Please, Alex, listen. There is more to this. Someone is using your name." He did not turn back. His voice was final, like a gavel striking. "Get out." The word shattered her. She stumbled toward the elevator, tears streaming unchecked. By the time the doors closed around her, she was sobbing, the sound raw and broken. She had lost him. She had lost the fragile sanctuary they had built. Back in her apartment, the silence was crushing. She stared at the files again, the damning signature that bore his name. Her heart clung to the memory of his hand steadying hers, his voice soft in the cafe. But her mind replayed the fury in his eyes, the conviction that she had betrayed him. Days blurred into nights. She went through motions at the hospital, her colleagues noticing the shadows under her eyes. When one asked if she was all right, she forced a smile and said she was fine. Inside, she was unraveling. She had chosen duty over silence, and in doing so, she had destroyed the one man who had made her believe love was possible again. The betrayal cut both ways. She had betrayed his trust, and he had betrayed her hope. At night, she would whisper into the darkness, "I never lied about my heart, Alex." But the walls did not answer. She tried to bury herself in work, yet every patient reminded her of the stakes. Every chart was another echo of the data she had uncovered. She wanted to scream, to demand justice, to drag the truth into the light. But she also wanted to crawl back into his arms to hear him say, "Trust me once more." Torn between love and integrity, Isabella felt herself drifting in an ocean with no shore. She had gained nothing but pain. And somewhere in the towering glass office of Knight Biotech, Alexander Knight believed the woman who had stood at his side, who had laughed with him under city lights, had been nothing more than a deceiver. The week after their rupture was the longest of Isabella's life. She moved through the hospital corridors like a ghost, her white coat fluttering as she scribbled notes and checked vitals, but her mind was never fully there. The betrayal had hollowed her, yet duty gnawed at her constantly. The files she had uncovered remained open on her laptop at night, their glaring red flags daring her to act. She knew she had to report them, even if Alex hated her forever. Her oath as a physician demanded it. One rainy evening after a 14-hour shift, she closed her locker and prepared to walk to the parking lot. The hospital halls were nearly empty, the air thick with the sterile scent of disinfectant. She pulled her coat tighter and stepped into the cool night, the lot illuminated only by flickering lamps. Halfway to her car, she noticed footsteps echoing behind her. At first, she brushed it off, but the rhythm matched hers too closely. She quickened her pace. So did they. Heart pounding, she glanced back. Two men in dark jackets followed at a deliberate distance, their faces shadowed beneath caps. One of them muttered loud enough for her to hear, "Stop digging or you will regret it." Ice slid down her spine. She broke into a run, heels clattering against asphalt, her breath ragged. The men followed their footsteps, pounding louder. She darted between cars, fumbling for her keys. Suddenly, a black SUV screeched across her path, cutting her off, headlights glaring into her eyes. Panic surged. She spun, only to find the men closing in. Her chest seized with terror. A horn blared, and another car roared into the lot from the opposite side. Tires screeched as it slid between her and the SUV, blocking her from the men. The driver's door flew open. "Isabella, get in." Her heart leapt. "Alex." She did not think, only reacted. She dashed into the passenger seat, slamming the door shut just as the men lunged forward. Alex gunned the engine, the car surging forward. The SUV tried to follow, but Alex maneuvered sharply, weaving through the rows, tires squealing. Isabella clutched the seat, breathless. "What is happening?" she gasped. His jaw was clenched, eyes fixed ahead. "I should be asking you that. Why are you being threatened in a hospital parking lot?" The city streets blurred as he pushed the car, faster headlights reflecting off rain-slick pavement. Behind them, the SUV gave chase. Isabella's pulse thundered. "They know I found something," she cried. "They told me to stop digging." Alex cursed under his breath, swerving hard onto an empty avenue. The SUV roared behind them, but Alex's skill behind the wheel was undeniable. He cut corners with precision, the engine growling as they raced through the night. Isabella pressed back into the seat, adrenaline flooding her veins. She stole a glance at him, at the rigid set of his shoulders, the focus in his gray eyes. Even in the chaos, he was composed, relentless. Finally, after several sharp turns, Alex killed the headlights and darted into a deserted alley, the car sliding to a halt behind a cluster of dumpsters. They waited breathless as the SUV sped past its engine, fading into the distance. Silence pressed down. Isabella sagged against the seat, trembling. Alex turned to her, fury etched into every line of his face. "Why did you not tell me, Isabella?" His voice was raw, louder than she had ever heard. "Why did you keep this from me when you knew you were in danger?" Her eyes filled with tears, her throat tight. "Because you would not have believed me." His expression cracked just for a moment, as though her words cut deeper than any threat. He exhaled slowly, dragging a hand down his face. "You think I would rather let you risk your life than listen." She met his eyes, tears spilling freely. "I did not know what to think anymore. All I knew was that patients were suffering, that files were falsified, and that your name was on them. His jaw tightened, pain flashing in his gaze. Isabella, you should have come to me. I could have protected you. I did not want protection, she whispered. I wanted truth. Silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. Rain pattered against the windshield, streaking the glass with silver trails. Alex's hand hovered near hers on the console, trembling slightly before withdrawing. We are not finished with this, he said at last, his voice softer, but edged with steel. Whoever threatened you, whoever falsified those records, they will answer for it. Isabella swallowed hard, her heart a storm of fear and longing. For the first time, she saw something more than cold fury in his eyes. She saw desperation, as though losing her would cost him more than he dared admit. The following days blurred into a tense whirlwind. Alex threw himself into an internal investigation at Knight Biotech, mobilizing resources with ruthless precision. He demanded access logs, cross-checked signatures, and pulled encrypted files the board had long ignored. Isabella, though still shaken, worked through her shifts with renewed determination. Patience came first, but every time she adjusted a chart or spoke with a family, the memory of those falsified records gnawed at her. She wanted justice, not only for herself, but for those who had trusted the system and nearly lost their lives. Late one night, Alex appeared at the hospital, his presence filling the small residence lounge, where she sat hunched over her laptop. His suit was rumpled, his eyes shadowed, but the fire in them burned bright. Isabella, he said simply, I found it. She looked up, heart-stopping. Found what? Proof. He slid a folder onto the table. Inside were documents, time-stamped entries, and emails pointing not to him, but to his vice president, Richard Hale. It was Hale who had falsified data, rerouted funds, and signed approvals under Alex's digital key. Isabella's breath caught as she read. The weight of relief was overwhelming, yet guilt pressed hard too. She had doubted him, and that doubt had nearly destroyed them both. Alex's voice was low, ragged. He used my name, my trust. I built this company to honor my mother, and he turned it into a weapon. Isabella covered her mouth, tears stinging. I am so sorry. I should have believed in you. He shook his head, leaning closer. No, you were right to question. You were fighting for lives. That is why. His voice broke, eyes glistening despite his effort to remain composed. That is why I cannot let you go. Emotion swelled in her chest. She reached for his hand instinctively. Alex, she whispered. Before more could be said, her pager buzzed. A patient emergency pulled her away, reminding them both that life was bigger than their storm. But the bond forged in fire was undeniable. The next morning, Isabella submitted her report, carefully outlining the discrepancies, naming Hale, and providing evidence Alex had unearthed. Hospital officials escalated the case, and soon regulators stepped in. News spread quickly. Knight Biotech CEO cleared of allegations, vice president under investigation. The scandal shook the medical world, but the truth prevailed. Days later, after a grueling shift, Isabella stepped out into the quiet courtyard beside the hospital. Exhaustion weighed her down, but she noticed Alex waiting on a bench beneath the faint glow of a lamppost. He rose when he saw her, his usual cold mask nowhere to be found. He approached slowly, eyes never leaving hers. I came to see you not as a CEO, not as a man trying to fix a company, just as me. Isabella's throat tightened. What does that mean? He stopped inches away, voice steady but tender. No more pretending. No more contracts or roles. From now on, Isabella, it is real. Her vision blurred as tears filled her eyes. She had held her emotions back for so long, but now the dam broke. It was always real to me, she whispered, her voice trembling. From the night you told me to pretend I never truly pretended. Alex exhaled a soft, unsteady laugh, escaping him as though those words had lifted years of weight. He reached out, cupped her face gently, and for the first time since everything unraveled, he kissed her. Not the stolen kiss of confusion, not the desperate one by the river, but a kiss of promise, slow and unguarded. Isabella melted into him, feeling the truth of his words in every heartbeat. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers, gray eyes shining with a warmth she had never thought possible. I do not want perfection anymore, he murmured. I just want you. The world around them faded, the hospital, the lamplight, the lingering echoes of betrayal. All that remained was two people who had found love in the unlikeliest place and fought through shadows to keep it. For Isabella, who once sat alone at her ex's wedding, drowning in humiliation, this moment felt like redemption. For Alex, who once thought coldness was survival, it felt like salvation. Together they had crossed from pretense into reality, and neither intended to let go. The garden of the Knight estate had never looked more alive. Rows of roses bloomed under the soft touch of spring sunlight. White chairs lined neatly beneath satin ribbons, and golden lanterns swayed gently in the breeze. There was no army of reporters, no grand gala, filled with tuxedos and jeweled gowns. This was intimate, chosen, a gathering of the few who had truly walked with them through every storm. Isabella stood behind the glass doors of the manor, her wedding dress simple yet luminous, the fabric hugging her form in a way that made her glow. Her hands trembled slightly around the bouquet, but her heart was steady. Emily, Alex's younger sister, peeked in with a mischievous grin. "Relax, doctor," she teased. "My brother looks more nervous than you out there." Isabella laughed softly, the sound easing her tension. "He is the one who always looks like stone," she whispered. "Not anymore." Emily winked. "Ever since you walked into his life, he has not been the cold machine he once was." The music began, strings swelling with grace. The doors opened, and Isabella stepped onto the aisle strewn with petals. Every guest turned, but she saw only one. Alex stood waiting, his suit perfectly cut, his gray eyes glistening with raw emotion. When their gazes met, his lips curved into a rare smile, warm enough to melt the memory of every cold mask he had worn. Step by step, she moved closer, her chest tight with joy and disbelief. The minister's voice rose clear and calm. "We gather here today not to witness pretense but truth, not performance but love." Alex took her hand, his touch grounding her as his eyes held hers. "Once I thought perfection would protect me," he said, voice strong, though it trembled at the edges. "But it never saved me. You did. You stood in the fire even when I turned against you, and you never stopped fighting for what was right. I promise never again to let you carry burdens alone. I promise to believe in you even if the world doubts." Isabella's vision blurred as tears streamed freely, but she lifted her chin, voice steady. "I came into your life pretending at first, but my heart betrayed me. I fell in love with you when I least expected it. I promise to stand beside you in light and in darkness, and I promise to keep walking forward even when my shoes betray me." Laughter rippled gently through the crowd at her playful twist, easing the solemn air. Alex chuckled too, squeezing her hand. The minister smiled. With these vows sealed, you may kiss the bride." Alex drew her close, brushing his lips against hers, as applause and cheers filled the garden. Emily's laughter rose above it all, but Isabella heard only the pounding of her own heart. In that kiss, every wound, every doubt, every pretense was healed. Later, as twilight deepened, they slipped away from the crowd to sit by the pond at the edge of the garden. Golden lights shimmered on the water, casting their reflections side by side. Isabella leaned against Alex, her head on his shoulder, and whispered with a smile, "Funny, is it not? We started with a lie, a whispered pretense at a wedding. Now we are here, husband and wife." Alex tilted his head, his lips brushing her hair. "No more pretending, Isabella. This is forever." Fireworks bloomed in the sky beyond the trees, their colors shimmering in the night, mirrored in the pond before them. She lifted her eyes, watching them dance, and felt her chest overflow. For the girl who once sat alone at her ex's wedding, humiliated and heartbroken, life had delivered something more extraordinary than she ever dared to imagine. For the man who once believed coldness was survival, love had given him warmth enough to last a lifetime. Together they began, not with perfection, but with truth, and that truth would carry them through whatever storms still lay ahead.